Good evening, everyone. It's May 22nd. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Listen Learn podcast. Scott Restrold's here. Obviously, the biggest story of the day has just been breaking the past couple hours, and that's the horrible, pure evil events in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, where someone, apparently a suicide bomber, according to U.S. officials, blew himself up to targeting teenage girls. And you have to ask yourself if there's a more depraved, pure evil act than that. It's disgusting, doesn't even begin to say it. And we need to start calling this barbarism out for what it is. And it's something that is not worthy of the civilized world. It's something we cannot grow used to accepting. And it's pure evil, plain and simple. And 19 people dead thus far, 50 injured, hopefully. Those tallies do not grow. And, you know, it's a reminder of how this war against terrorism is really the defining battle our generation faces, and whether or not we will deal with it as forcefully as past generations dealt with the tyranny of communism, tyranny of Nazism, and in words of Churchill, promised never to surrender, accept no sacrifices, and say that this is an evil in this world that we are not going to tolerate. And that's an approach that we need to take. I think if you listen to what the president said yesterday in Saudi Arabia, demanding to drive out terrorists of their territory, deprive them of sanctuary financially, sanctuary in places of worship, sanctuary everywhere, that's just required. And it's a concerted effort between the West and the good Islam to push out all the radical elements. And that's why I was happy to hear the president say the words Islamic extremism and Islamic terrorism, while at the same time making a clear distinction between the whole of Islam. Because the problem we have is not with Islam. The problem we have is with a sect within Islam. And until we work with our partners, responsible partners in the Middle East, and together work to eradicate this threat, it's not going to go away. And today's just another stark reminder of it. It's while we don't know many of the details yet, as we look back to last year's the UK voting Brexit to separate from the European Union and the free border policy, it's impossible not to see a larger connection to a rise in terrorism on the mainland with attacks in Paris, Germany, Sweden, massive problems in Belgium, to the massive influx of refugees and migrants whom they could not vet and now are able to crisscross the continent with European passports with little check from authorities. And that's a rationale for why Europe is soon going to be included on a laptop ban on flights to the United States, because Europe does not know everyone who's in its continent, and that poses massive security problems. And it's a reason why the threats they face in some ways are more severe than the ones we face. It's a reminder of why we need to maintain strict control of our borders and vet everyone who comes in here to know exactly who it is that's entering the country and that they are consistent with our values. But at some point, we just need to say that we, as a civilized world, are not going to permit the phrase suicide bomber attacks preteen girls to become a norm in our society. We can't grow numb to this. We can't let it become an accepted truth that, on occasion, suicide bombers attack. Because the problem is, at the moment, it seems like the attack occurred just outside of the concert hall as people were exiting the concert. A sports stadium, a concert, you can do a decent job securing. If you go to a baseball game today, everyone gets patted down. You have a good idea of who's coming in or out. But there are all these secondary targets just outside stadiums, in malls, just in public places where it's impossible to have security. And if someone wants to do damage and is willing to kill themselves, to kill and damage other innocent people, it's extremely hard to stop that. So you really need to crack down on who's in your country to ensure that you're not bringing in new people who could prove to be dangerous. And you also need to eliminate, completely eradicate from this earth, the funding networks, the territory in which people, terrorist organizations train and build these capabilities in the uncivilized world. Um, and until you do that, this is going to continue to be a threat we have to deal with. And I think the president has made good progress on his trip overseas, and at the moment with the Saudis trying to push for a more concerted effort, but it's going to take time. And we need to make this a key priority for the next 2 years and recognize that this is the defining battle of our generation. This is a war between good and evil, and we need to decide whether or not we're going to tolerate a certain amount of evil in our world, or we're going to work tirelessly to completely eradicate it, as our forefathers have done with previous evils from Stalin's Soviet Union to Hitler's Nazi Germany. It's really a sad day, and I ask keep those in the UK in our prayers, in our thoughts, and let's hope that our security personnel and our intelligence personnel are able to stop any further attacks from occurring. But the only, just to follow up more on the Trump overseas trip, I think the big thing you're seeing here is, so far he's been in Saudi Arabia, now he's in Israel, is really the beginning of an anti-Iran alliance. It's something that's slowly, and I'd emphasize slowly, bringing the Saudis and Israelis a little bit closer together, kind of an enemy of my enemy is my wary ally. But I was glad to see the Saudis are buying $110 billion of defense equipment and $350 billion over a decade from U.S. companies that will benefit the U.S. economy and support defense manufacturing jobs, but more importantly, help build up the Saudi defense capabilities. So that the fact is, as we've learned over the past 15 years, we cannot police the Middle East. We need the responsible parties in the Middle East to be able to police themselves. And that's a significant step from the Saudis trying to say, we're going to up our military game and not let Iran, the world's top funder of terrorism, become a regional hegemon. So, yeah, I think you're seeing the beginnings of an anti-Iran alliance. There's a lot more to be done. The Saudis are still far from a perfect ally, but they are a much more responsible party still than Iran. In Israel, Trump, I think, is trying to lay the groundworks to begin talks between Israel and Palestine. I'm still quite skeptical that the Palestinians are serious about peace. They haven't been for quite a long time. But it does not hurt to try and talk. And, if there's, given his pro-Israeli credentials and Netanyahu's tough Israeli credentials, it's perhaps only Trump and Netanyahu who have the credibility with hardliners to be able to make a deal with the Palestinians. But at the moment, I really wouldn't hold my breath there. Key thing I'm actually looking to is in the next couple of days when Trump will be visiting a NATO conference. And the key thing is Europe is not maintaining its requirement of paying 2% for defense. And as a consequence, you see the military power in places like Italy, Germany, absolutely atrophy away. And can we get them on a path to 2% defense? To me, that's the big benchmark for this foreign trip. Do we see movement on that area? We've seen movement in the Middle East now with Saudi Arabia upping its defense capabilities. We need a hard commitment from the Europeans to do the same, to better burden share in a highly dangerous world. And the events in Manchester should further underline the fact that our security problems are Europe's security problems. These are global security problems. They require global responses, and that means global burden sharing, global military spending. And the Europeans need to start carrying their weight, and particularly the Germans and some of the other Southern Europeans who are wealthy countries and have the ability to spend and simply aren't. That needs to change. So that's the thing I'm going to watch for in the next couple of days. Would urge you to as well. See whether or not we can get the Europeans to make a down payment on security, like we've been able to make the Saudis do. So, on a very sad day, that's really all I have to say. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about the Trump budget and what it means. And the brief overview will be, it's a little bit more of a political document than a governing document, but we'll discuss it more tomorrow. And again, please keep the people in Manchester in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it. And please hit the subscribe button. That way you can hear our podcast in the future. Thank you. Have a great night.